Silence. No prison doors shaking. No believers scattered. No underground prayers echoing in the night. Just comfort, safety, stability. But here is the question. What if the early church had chosen comfort instead of courage? What if, when persecution began, they had said, "This is too much. This costs too much. Let's protect what we have"? Would the gospel have spread? Would revival have exploded? Would we even be here today? Tonight, you're going to discover a dangerous truth hidden in the book of Acts. Comfort can preserve your life, but it can also paralyze your calling. Stay with me until the end, because what happened to the early church might be happening again right now. And if this message speaks to you, take 1 second, like this video, and subscribe. You're not just supporting a channel, you're strengthening a movement. Let's begin. It began with fire, not symbolic fire. Real power, real transformation. In Acts chapter 2, the Spirit falls. Tongues of fire rest upon ordinary men. Fishermen become preachers. Fearful disciples become bold witnesses. And in a single day, 3,000 souls are added. 3,000. That kind of growth changes everything. Suddenly, the church is no longer a small group hiding behind locked doors. It is visible, vibrant, united. They break bread from house to house. They share their possessions. No one lacks. There is joy. There is awe. There are miracles in the streets. And here is the dangerous part. It was working. Acts says they had favor with all the people. Imagine that. Favor, influence, momentum, the kind of season every movement dreams about. If we stop the story there, it would feel like arrival. But revival is not sustained by arrival. It is sustained by surrender. This is the moment most people miss. Before persecution came, comfort arrived. They were respected. They were growing. They were unified. And comfort does not shout. It whispers. You deserve to protect this. You should preserve this peace. Don't disrupt what is working. Then Acts chapter 3 happens. A lame man is healed at the temple gate. The miracle is undeniable. The crowd gathers. Peter preaches again. Thousands more believe. But this time, the authorities are watching. Peter and John are arrested. Now the atmosphere shifts. The same city that shouted Hosanna not long ago is the city that crucified Jesus. And the religious leaders who orchestrated that execution are now questioning his followers. This is the crossroads. The council commands them, do not speak in this name anymore. It sounds reasonable. Just be quiet. Keep your faith private. Continue meeting in homes. Avoid public tension. Protect the movement. That is how comfort negotiates. It does not demand denial. It suggests silence. Imagine if they had agreed. Imagine Peter saying, "We have families. We have new believers to protect. Let's not provoke unnecessary danger." It would have sounded wise, strategic, responsible, but it would have slowly suffocated the fire. Instead, Peter answers with words that split history in two. We cannot help but speak about what we have seen and heard. That is not recklessness. That is conviction. They return to the believers and report the threats. And here is the moment that reveals everything. They pray, but they do not pray for protection. They do not pray for comfort. They do not pray for an easier path. They pray for boldness. Stretch out your hand. Perform signs and wonders. Give us courage to speak. The ground shakes, not because of danger, because of agreement, and they are filled again. Here is the hook that most miss. Comfort was available. Boldness was chosen. The early church could have transitioned into a respected spiritual community. Accepted, stable, harmless. Instead, they chose to remain dangerous. Comfort preserves reputation. Courage advances kingdom. At this stage in Acts, persecution is still manageable. It is mostly threats and intimidation. This was the easiest moment to compromise, because the pressure was not yet unbearable. And that is when compromise is most tempting, when the cost is rising, but not crushing. If they had chosen comfort here, Acts chapter 8 would never happen. The gospel might have remained inside Jerusalem's walls. The story could have slowed into maintenance instead of movement. But something inside them burned stronger than fear. They remembered the Great Commission. They remembered the cross. They remembered the empty tomb. And comfort suddenly looked small compared to calling. Here is the tension for the viewer. The early church was not forced into boldness. They chose it. They were offered a quieter path, a safer influence, a manageable faith, and they refused. Because revival is not sustained by favorable conditions. It is sustained by unshakable conviction. The question now is unavoidable. If we had been there, would we have chosen comfort, or would we have prayed for boldness while the threats echoed outside the door? This is where the story begins to turn. Because once comfort is rejected, fire spreads. And what happens next changes everything. The atmosphere shifts. Up until now, the threats were verbal. Intimidation, warnings, political pressure. But in Acts 7, the cost becomes visible. Stephen stands before the council, not as an apostle, not as one of the 12, just a servant, a man full of faith and the Holy Spirit. And he speaks with fire. He recounts Israel's history. He exposes hardened hearts. He declares that they resisted the Spirit just as their fathers did. The room tightens. Faces harden. Conviction turns to fury. And then it happens. They drag him outside the city. Stones begin to fall. The first martyr of the church collapses beneath a sky that once opened at Jesus' baptism. Stephen looks upward and sees the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. Standing, not seated, as if heaven itself rose in honor of a faithful witness. And Stephen prays the unthinkable. Lord, do not hold this sin against them. Then silence. The church has crossed a line it cannot uncross. This is no longer pressure. This is blood. Acts 8 begins with a sentence that changes everything. A great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered. Scattered. That word sounds like defeat. Homes abandoned. Families displaced. Believers running for safety. If comfort had been tempting before, now it is gone. This is the moment where movements collapse. Fear spreads faster than faith. Parents whisper in the dark. Children sense the tension. Doors close quietly. Saul ravages the church. He enters house after house, dragging men and women to prison. This is not symbolic discomfort. This is survival. And here's the hook. This is exactly where many would say, enough. This is where faith could shrink into secrecy, where believers could decide that public witness is too dangerous. But Acts records something astonishing. Those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. Read that again. They were not just fleeing. They were carrying. The enemy intended to silence the church in Jerusalem. Instead, he unintentionally exported it. Persecution became propulsion. If they had remained comfortable in Jerusalem, the gospel might have stayed centralized, contained, local. But scattering forced multiplication, like seeds thrown into new soil. Philip goes down to Samaria. Samaria, a place Jews historically avoided, a place divided by prejudice and suspicion. And revival breaks out there. Unclean spirits leave. The paralyzed walk. The city is filled with joy. Joy, not in Jerusalem, in Samaria. Pressure did what preference never would have done. It pushed them beyond their familiar borders. Here is the paradox. Comfort concentrates. Persecution distributes. The early church did not plan a strategic expansion campaign. They did not organize a mission conference. They were forced out. But what could have been a funeral became a wildfire. And notice this carefully. It was not only apostles preaching. It was ordinary believers, mothers, merchants, former fishermen, young converts. They did not wait for ideal conditions. They spoke about what they had seen and heard. That is what makes this moment explosive. The movement was no longer dependent on a central location or a small group of leaders. It had become organic, uncontainable. Imagine the alternative. If they had chosen safety by silence, if scattered believers had decided, let's lay low until this passes. Samaria might have remained untouched. The Ethiopian official in the next chapter might never have heard. Africa might have waited. History might have shifted. But the church refused to let fear dictate mission. This is the turning point. The death of Stephen looked like defeat. The scattering looked like collapse. But heaven was rewriting the narrative. What looked like loss was expansion in disguise. And here is the deeper hook for today. Sometimes God allows shaking not to destroy the church, but to decentralize it. When comfort is removed, calling becomes clearer. When walls fall, the message moves. The early church discovered something powerful under pressure. The gospel does not need perfect conditions. It only needs willing voices. And once the fire leaves Jerusalem, there is no stopping it, because what was once a local revival is about to become a global movement. The borders were not just geographic, they were cultural, ethnic, religious, invisible walls built over centuries. And up until now, the gospel had moved, but mostly among Jews. Familiar language, shared history, common expectation of a Messiah. But pressure had pushed believers outward, and now the fire approaches forbidden territory. Philip enters Samaria. To us, that may sound normal, but to a first-century Jew, Samaria was complicated. Generations of tension, distrust woven into identity, worship disagreements that divided families and traditions. And yet, revival erupts there. Crowds listen. Unclean spirits flee. The lame walk. There's great joy in that city. Joy in a place once avoided. Here's the hook. The gospel reached Samaria not because it was comfortable, but because comfort was gone. If the church had stayed secure in Jerusalem, Samaria might have remained untouched. But scattering shattered prejudice. Then something even more strategic happens. An angel tells Philip to go south, to a desert road. A desert. No crowd. No stage. No visible revival. Just obedience. On that road is an Ethiopian official, a man of influence, treasurer to a queen, educated, powerful, searching. He is reading Isaiah aloud. Think about the precision of this moment. Persecution scattered believers. Scattering positioned Philip. Obedience placed him on a desert road. And the gospel stepped into Africa. One conversation. One explanation of prophecy. One baptism in roadside water. And history shifts. Comfort would never have taken Philip to that road. Revival in Samaria was exciting. Momentum was building. Staying there would have made sense. But fire does not cling to applause. It follows assignment. And now the lines stretch further. Acts 10. Peter has a vision. A sheet descending from heaven. Animals considered unclean. A voice saying, "Do not call impure what God has made clean." At the same time, in another city, a Roman centurion named Cornelius is praying. A Gentile. An outsider. If this were left to tradition, the gospel might have hesitated. But heaven interrupts prejudice. Peter walks into a Gentile home. That alone was controversial. And as he speaks, the Holy Spirit falls. Not after circumcision, not after cultural conversion, but during the message. The same Spirit, the same fire, the same evidence. Silence fills the room. Because this changes everything. The gospel is no longer crossing cities. It is crossing categories. Jew and Samaritan, Jew and Ethiopian, Jew and Roman. Barriers crumble one by one. Here is the tension. Every boundary broken in Acts required discomfort. Philip had to leave revival in Samaria. Peter had to confront lifelong assumptions. Believers had to accept that God was moving beyond their expectations. Comfort protects tradition. Fire fulfills mission. Imagine if they had chosen familiarity over obedience. If Peter had ignored the vision. If Philip had stayed where crowds were large. If the church had insisted on cultural uniformity. The movement might have stalled. Contained within one ethnicity. Confined to one region. But instead, Acts becomes a story of widening circles. Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth. Not because it was easy. Because they refused to shrink back. And here is the deeper hook. God often expands vision through disruption. The church did not sit in a room planning global strategy. They responded to divine interruptions. And every interruption carried them further. The Ethiopian returns home carrying the message. Cornelius' household becomes a testimony that salvation is for all. The lines that once divided begin to dissolve. And the fire is no longer local. It is international. This is no longer a revival story. It is a movement story. And it all traces back to one decision. They would not choose comfort over calling. Because once the gospel crosses one forbidden line, it never stops moving. The movement has outgrown Jerusalem. It has crossed prejudice. It has crossed deserts. It has crossed identity. Now it faces its next decision. In Antioch, something powerful is happening. Prophets and teachers are gathered. They are worshiping, fasting, listening. No crisis. No immediate persecution. No visible threat. Just sensitivity to the Spirit. And in that atmosphere, the Holy Spirit speaks. Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them. This is the moment. Antioch is thriving. Leadership is strong. Teaching is solid. Momentum is real. And the Spirit asks them to release 2 of their best. Comfort says, keep your strongest leaders. Security says, build locally. Stability says, protect what is working. But the church lays hands on them and sends them. This is the shift from survival to strategy. Up until now, persecution pushed expansion. Now obedience fuels it. Barnabas and Saul begin traveling. Cities receive them. Cities reject them. Synagogues open. Synagogues expel. They are praised as gods in one place, stoned in another, left for dead, and yet they rise and continue. Here is the hook. The early church did not measure success by comfort. They measured it by faithfulness. Shipwrecks come. Imprisonments follow. Beatings multiply. In Philippi, Paul and Silas are chained in the inner cell. If comfort had been their priority, this is where the story ends. But at midnight they sing. Chains on their wrists, blood on their backs, worship in their lungs, and the prison shakes. Not because they demanded freedom, because they refused silence. From Antioch to Asia Minor, to Greece, to Rome, the message spreads. Not neatly, not safely, but powerfully. And now imagine the alternative timeline. A church that chose to consolidate instead of commission. A church that kept its best leaders close. A church that avoided hostile regions. A church that avoided controversy. Christianity might have remained a regional sect. Rome might never have heard. Europe might never have been reached. History might have bent differently. But the early church embraced something deeper than comfort. They embraced calling. They understood a secret that many still struggle to grasp. Comfort preserves what exists. Calling multiplies what is possible. Every city they entered carried risk. Every sermon carried consequence. But the gospel kept advancing, not because conditions were favorable, because conviction was unshakable. Acts ends in Rome. Paul under house arrest. Chains still present, yet preaching freely. The empire tried to contain him, but the word was not chained. That is how the book closes. Not with a period, with momentum. Here is the final hook. The early church did not grow despite pressure. It grew because it refused to retreat into comfort. Every expansion in Acts is tied to surrender. Every breakthrough is tied to obedience. Every revival is tied to risk. And now the question moves from history to us. If comfort had been their priority, we might not know this story. So what are we choosing today? Are we protecting stability? Or are we pursuing assignment? Are we preserving reputation? Or are we carrying fire? Because revival has never been born in safe rooms. It is born in surrendered hearts. The Spirit is still speaking. The mission is still active. The call is still costly. And the choice is still ours. If this message awakens something in you, do not let it fade into comfort. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone who needs to remember that faith was never designed to be convenient. The early church chose fire. Now it is our turn.